Poker chips skittered across my marble floor like confetti. I never ordered, and Vivian Ashcroft, perfectly pressed and painfully polite, planted her hand on my dining table and said, "This mansion belongs to the community." Now her voice bouncing off the glass and steel. Like it paid rent behind her were three guys in dark suits who looked more like private security than neighbors. And I remember the way one jacket bulged in a way that said, "We're not here to welcome you with banana bread, yeah?" That happened. I'd owned the place for less than a day. I was still figuring out which switch dimmed, which skylight. And here I was being told my home was a community asset. The funny part is, I had bought this house impulsively. A private auction, a number on a paddle too. $8 million for a Cliffside glass box that stole my breath every time the Pacific threw gold at the horizon. I'm an architect, sustainable design. The kind of guy who lectures clients about cross-ventilation and solar exposure, and then does something reckless because a property just feels right. You know what I mean? I thought I bought light and silence and a little peace, and what I got was an HOA president with a leather folder and a smile like a scalpel. She handed me papers called community access agreements, and I skimmed like I always do. Then I read line by line and felt my pulse run permanent easements to my private beach usage rights, for my guest house, for community events, recreational access to my pool and terrace because of alleged access. Inequities, a vote was already scheduled for Friday. Non-compliance meant fines, and legal action isolation was implied. With the softness of a lullaby, I told her I'd review with an attorney. She said she hoped I'd make the right choice. Her men drifted like shadows down my path, and I stood there on a deck the color of weathered silver, wondering how a dream purchase could turn into a siege in 24 hours that night. I did what I know. I researched. I pulled deeds and permits and sales histories until my eyes felt like sand, and patterns started to glow. 3 families sold well under market after months of fines and disputes, and tucked in the county portal was a permit for a so-called community wellness center, stamped with soundproofing specs and industrial electrical capacity that screamed casino, not group therapy. The filer was a development company tied to Vivian's household, and the timeline lined up a little too neatly for coincidence. The next morning, Vivian marched back with a tall lawyer named Gordon Whitaker, whose business card felt like it was printed on a bar of gold. He offered a generous compromise. "I give the HOA permanent rights to my beach guest house pool. They waive my fees for a year, 12 grand. For the keys to the kingdom." I said no, because a year of waived dues doesn't buy what I moved here for. He smiled with reptile warmth and said, "Our coastal community operates under special provisions. I asked to see the original development agreements, and Vivian promised to present them Friday, as soon as they left the doorbell." Barely cooled before a gentle knock came from the cliffside path. Beatrice Sterling introduced herself with the steady eyes of someone who's seen too much and kept her receipts. She told me about the Morrisons and the Hendersons and the Blackwells, mailboxes, the wrong shade of blue, landscaping that allegedly blocked sightlines, beach toys that somehow counted as unsightly storage, fines stacked like bricks until people either signed away rights or sold in exhaustion. And then the cars at night, the expensive ones, the meetings that ran until 3 in the morning, under a roof stuffed with soundproofing. She said, "Document everything, and don't expect quick help locally." Vivian had friends everywhere. I believed her. And I hated that I did. Thursday at 10:30 a.m., the power cut. Wi-Fi died. Cell signal flatlined. My neighbor's porch still glowed like Christmas. The meter box had fresh tool marks that looked like failure if you didn't know what you were looking at the utility. Said earliest appointment Monday, a county inspector arrived out of nowhere, tape measure, and frown hunting for code violations, with a zeal that would have been admirable if he were discussing bridges. Railing height off by a whisper stare. Tread variance by a hair retroactive code. Updates that magically turned yesterday's approvals into today's fines. I stood on my own deck and felt the trap tighten. Legal pressure, technical pressure, utility pressure, all the kind that makes a new homeowner say fine. Take the guest house. Just leave me alone. That night I went deeper into the record's coastal permits from decades back. Language about noise and commercial activity. State, environmental oversight. That didn't disappear with a board vote. And then, my finger stopped on a signature I knew better than my own. Judge Harrison Thornfield. My father on earlier environmental reviews and approvals. Suddenly, my impulsive purchase felt less impulsive and more like a chess piece sliding into place. And I realized two true things at once. One, I had been pulled toward this property for a reason I couldn't name. And two, if I played this wrong, I could lose more than a view. Friday night, the community center was packed like a theater. More faces than the neighborhood could possibly hold, people dressed too well for a routine. HOA meeting, Vivian took the mic and called me a threat to emergency access, a danger to property values, a selfish obstructionist, slides flashed with red arrows over aerials. Of my house, doomsday scenarios about ambulances turned away at my gate. The applause sounded coached. The murmurs sounded planted. I let it roll over me like fog. Then I stood and plugged my phone into their projector and kept my voice steady. Before we talk about my obligations, let's talk about what you're actually building on the Morrison lot. Permit pages appeared in high relief. Heavy electrical loads. Industrial ventilation. Layered sound attenuation. Security doors and cash handling nooks that don't belong in bake sale headquarters. Side by side, comparisons with legitimate community centers I've designed. Photos taken from public vantage points, showing escape corridors and late-night deliveries. A low ripple moved through the room, and Vivian tried to laugh it off. She called me an architect, not a prosecutor. I said, I'm precisely the guy you can't bluff with building specs. And then I asked a question that fell like a brick. Are you denying your prior illegal gambling operations in Nevada and Arizona? Silence hit so hard, I could hear the ventilation. And that's where the twist landed. The double doors swung open, and agents in jackets with 3 letters stepped into the aisle with a calm that says, We've been here before. Agent Rebecca Morrison announced a federal investigation. Nobody move hands, where we can see arrests for racketeering and money laundering, and conspiracy and gambling violations. And the room's center of gravity shifted from Vivian's smile to the badge on Dana's belt. Then my father walked in, not as dad, but as the federal judge, who had signed more than a few warrants. He looked at Vivian and said, We have unfinished business. And every time I replay that moment, I think about how small the distance is between intimidation and accountability. He explained what he could about the 18-month task force, about how organized crime had found a clever mask in HOA authority, about how they used fines to bleed families and permits to hide casinos and connections to smother complaints. I didn't say much because the agents were working, but I did say this. I bought this house with my money and my instincts. And when the pressure started, I did what ordinary people do. I documented. I asked questions. I didn't sign away what wasn't theirs. And when I realized the scale, I said yes to being part of something that could shut it down. The rest of the night was zip ties and evidence bags and tow trucks, hauling cars that had names, you whisper, and neighbors walking out into the parking lot with faces like they finally heard the hum that had been in their walls for years. The weeks after were the part movies montage, because the work is boring and beautiful. The illegal build got torn down. The lot got replanted with native grasses. The families who'd been squeezed got restitution from seized assets. The old HOA dissolved, and a transparent resident council replaced it. Budgets posted. Decisions recorded. No more mystery fines that arrive like lightning. Values stabilized, then climbed because trust is a value. Turns out somewhere in there. I met Dr. Isabella Winters from the Federal Victim Assistance Program. She brought coffee and asked if I was sleeping. She listened. More than she spoke, we walked the restored path down to the beach and watched kids rediscover sand. And when I told her I hadn't been just a random buyer, that my father had known the legal terrain, and I had agreed to be bait because my training gave me cover, she smiled. The kind of smile that says, I suspected, but I waited for you to say it. Months later, a letter came from a woman in Arizona who watched a documentary about our case and used the new laws to stop her HOA from carving up her yard. For a sham project enclosed was a photo of a graduation party under string lights that would have been ripped out if nobody had fought. Isabella framed it and hung it by my desk. When I forget why any of it mattered, I look at that picture and remember that grass is never just grass. It's birthdays and dogs and chairs and peace is worth some trouble. On a calm morning, my father stood with me on the deck and said, "Justice isn't only punishment, it's restoration and prevention." He looked tired in a way only people who carry big things look, and I felt lucky to have him, and also responsible to live up to what this fight demanded. I'll end the way I wish someone had spoken to me the day I closed on this house, because I know some of you are in your own version of it right now. An HOA letter. You don't understand. A neighbor who plays cop. A rule that smells like control. Dressed up as safety document everything. Ask for the original agreements, not the glossy summaries. Compare permits to what they claim to build. Talk to the quiet neighbor who knows the night traffic by heart. Don't rush to sign away what you can never get back. And if you think you're alone, you're not. There are laws now and people who will stand with you when you say no. Here's the uncomfortable question. I want to leave on the table because the comments are where this community really lives. In your view, when does a homeowners association stop being a tool for community and become a mask for power? Where is the line between safety and theft? If you were me that week, would you have signed to keep the peace, hired a lawyer and gone quiet, or done exactly what I did and risked the blowback to push for the truth? Tell me below, argue with me. Share what happened on your street and what worked. Hit like if this helped you see something you needed to see. Share it with the person in your life who keeps saying, maybe I should just pay the fine, and subscribe. Because next week I'm telling you about the HOA president who tried to ban a veteran service dog from the park, not realizing the man's brother is a federal prosecutor. Trust me, that one tastes like justice too.